Here's a genuinely terrifying thought that is likely true. We may already be in Cold War 2.0 right now. Every single step taken by both the Russians and by the U.S. government, they've been wrong every step of the way. Both sides have been wrong every single step of the way. Either one could have nipped this in the bud at some point if they just acted a different way. But they keep on escalating it, and now I fear that we're already in Cold War 2.0. So, what happened exactly? It all started with Ukraine. In Ukraine, you had two movements, okay? You had a movement that wants to become more westernized and become part of the European Union, essentially, and do trade deals with them and adopt about 300 of their laws. And the other side is more sympathetic to the old Soviet bloc, and they're more ethnically Russian, and they want to go more in that direction. And what happened is Yanukovych, the former leader, the former president of Ukraine, agreed to do a deal with the EU, and at the last minute, he changed his mind. Now, when he changed his mind, the grassroots rose up, the pro-European grassroots rose up, and they were pissed off. That's when you saw those tremendous protests going on in the street. And then there was a backlash to that as well, because you had the ethnic Russians and the people who were more part of Crimea in that area stand up and fight back against those protesters. And then, I mean, things got crazy. There were riot police involved. Riot police were shooting protesters with snipers. This led to Yanukovych needing to sit down at the table and do a peace deal with the protesters. They came to a peace deal that said they're going to go back to the 2004 Constitution, which was more democratic and less authoritarian. And they agreed to new early elections. But then the day after the peace deal was reached, Yanukovych fled because he was afraid the worst would happen. You know, that there would be some sort of a violent coup, and he went to protect himself in Russia, essentially. So now you have, at that point, I should say, you had the ethnic Russians, the pro-Russian people in Ukraine saying, well, this new government is illegitimate because a new government stepped in that's more pro-Western. The United States supports this new government. And they just say, no, that person's not legitimate. Okay, Yanukovych is still the president. Just because he's in Russia doesn't mean dick. Okay, and then we saw Vladimir Putin invade Crimea, and his argument was, "Whoa, I'm just protecting these Crimeans, man. These guys, they're ethnically Russian, and they agree with us. And you guys just did a violent coup with the government, and we're making sure that you don't come and round up the ethnic Russians and kill them." Now, is that a legitimate argument? It might sound like it at face value, but it's really not, because he invaded a sovereign country, the country being Ukraine, because Crimea is part of Ukraine. You can't do that. That's a crazy violation of international law. Now, of course, the U.S. has no leverage in telling him not to do that, because with what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan and with our 900 military bases in Guantanamo Bay and this and that, it's like whenever the America says something now, the world rolls their eyes. So like, really? You're going to fucking talk? It's like the biggest bully in the class preaching peace. That's crazy that nobody's going to listen to you. So we were in a situation at that point where the world community was condemning Putin and saying, "Look, man, you can't do that. No, you're not allowed to do that." So you had European Union sanctions on Russia. Then Obama got involved and started doing sanctions on Russia. And that started the snowball effect. So then the Russians responded. And then America responded again. And then you have fucking people like John McCain, the idiot, going on Sunday shows here in the U.S. talking about how, oh, Russia is a gas station that's masquerading as a country, or saying something to that effect. Then you have people on TV, on pro-Russian news channels in Russia, talking about how Russia can leave America a radioactive ash heap if it wants to, with graphics of like nuclear explosions in the background and shit. Okay, now it's getting fucking scary. Now it's getting scary. You got senators in the U.S. sniping against Russia, Russian news agencies, which are just propaganda agencies, sniping against America, Vladimir Putin and Obama, there's no love there. Obama just decided to put even more sanctions on Russia, and that leads us to what happened yesterday. Yesterday, there was the Crimean vote, the referendum to determine if they want to essentially become their own independent state apart from Ukraine or become part of Russia. And the vote is a joke. It's a joke. Now, look, understand something, man. In principle, I originally proposed I think Crimea should be separate from Ukraine because they do have deep political differences, and it's a country that's like glued together with a shitty Elmer's glue that never works. Like, it's just it's a good idea in theory that Crimea could be its own place. Crimea can do deals with Russia if it wants to. Ukraine can be pro-European Union and Western if it wants to, and you just split it up and call it a day. But the way that the referendum happened is the problem, because it's not legitimate. Russia invaded at the barrel of a gun. People had to do a vote, and they're claiming 97% of the people voted in favor of Crimea joining Russia. And that's not true. It's not true, number one, because nothing's ever 97%, ever. You could do a vote, hey, do you guys like mother and apple pie in America? It wouldn't be 97%. It just doesn't fucking happen. It never does. That's like the 100% vote to zero in North Korea. It's not real. But also, there was no option for a no vote on the ballot. We talked about that on Friday. Now, why wouldn't, look, Putin, man, if you wanted to get this shit done, if you really want Crimea to either be an independent state or become part of Russia, you could have said, all right, have the vote, and then withdrew all your troops, because it's not legitimate if you have people with guns standing at the polling stations. It's crazy, right? That's threats. You would have to withdraw your troops and have a legitimate vote. And then guess what? You probably still would have won. You would have won. I mean, 60% of Crimea is ethnic Russian. You probably would have won. But you didn't do that. You had to assure your victory and lie your way through it and threaten violence. And now the world community is rightly going, that's not legitimate. No, that Crimea is still part of Ukraine. So now, again, Obama's response to that was, well, now we're going to sanction him more. And a lot of the headlines are Obama's resurrecting Cold War sanctions. Some of the same sanctions we had on Russia during the Cold War, that's what we're doing now. And here's the point, man. What, you think Vladimir Putin's going to lay down and take that? You think Vladimir Putin's going to go, well, you know what, man? You guys were right all along. Take Crimea back. It's not going to happen. So what we're going to see is endless escalation here, which means we are in the middle of another Cold War. And what makes me think, let's put it that way, that it's an even more complex situation than what I originally thought, is that I just learned on Sunday that apparently the original proposal in Ukraine, so the EU was in talks with Ukraine and Russia was, of course, in talks with Ukraine. This was back before anything happened. And we learned that apparently the EU gave an ultimatum. The EU said, either you're with us or you're not. Okay, so you got to make a fucking decision. You either do trade deals with us or you don't. And that made it so that you put Ukraine in a difficult situation, because what Vladimir Putin's other separate proposal at the time was, whoa, don't do that. Why don't we just do some of Ukraine does deals with the EU, the parts they want to, and other parts do it with us. So originally Vladimir Putin's proposal was more rational. It was this idea that, hey, look, man, Crimea is going to want to do business with us more, so why don't they deal with us, and if the rest of Ukraine wants to deal with the EU, that's fine. But the media is not telling you that. So my main point here is there are examples on both sides where both sides acted wrong. Whether it's Russia invading Crimea and invading Ukraine, which you're not allowed to fucking do, that's wrong, you can't do that. Whether it's the fake referendum, that's also wrong, you can't do that. Or whether it's the United States and the West getting involved and claiming, well, we approve of the new government in Ukraine when it was a coup. You know, if that was a government they didn't like, they would have just said that's not legitimate. But since it's a government that's pro-Western, they go, oh, that's a legitimate coup. So we actually appreciate that one. We like that one. So it's the U.S. getting too involved. When they escalated and did sanctions 2 times, 3 times, that's getting too involved. At any step of the way, you could have not done something and prevented this escalation into the Cold War, into this new Cold War. But you didn't. And now who knows how far it'll go, man. But it's a scary proposition. And I'll tell you what, it makes me think that our leaders are children, you know? Like, our leaders are children. Let me ask you a question. What does Joe Schmo, average guy Republican in the middle of Tuscaloosa, Alabama right now, or in the middle of Kentucky, Is he sitting around going, well, gosh golly, you know what? I think we should probably get more involved in that whole Ukraine-Crimea situation. Don't you think so, Bessie? No, they're not sitting around saying that. And they're right. That's none of our fucking business. That's what, it ain't got nothing to do with me. Ain't no Russian did nothing to me. Ain't no Ukrainian did nothing to me, man. And they're right. You know, whether it's you're run-of-the-mill Republican or you're run-of-the-mill progressive like myself, well, you think I'm sitting around going, you know what would be better if we got more involved in Ukraine right now? No, nobody wants to fucking get involved in Ukraine. Why are we really threatening World War III over Ukraine? Really, Ukraine. Don't get me wrong, I have opinions and beliefs as to what should happen there and what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. But that's irrelevant. It's none of my fucking business. Are they sitting around in Sweden right now going, how can we get more involved in this situation in Ukraine and Crimea? No, because they're not fucking idiots. They don't think they should get involved in every single situation ever that ever happens in the history of the world. Because they're smart. But our politicians with the dick-slinging contests, whether it's Obama or Putin, walking out, yeah, my dick is bigger. What, you want to threaten wars here? I'm going to sanction you, buddy. Oh, really? Well, I'm going to invade a sovereign nation. How about that, buddy? Here, look, my dick's bigger now. Oh, really? Meanwhile, all the populations of all these nations are sitting around going, are these guys fucking serious? Really? You do know we live in the nuclear age, you dipshits.